Martha Rose had lived in the same little yellow house at the edge of the woods for over 50 years. The shutters had faded, the roof had been patched twice, and the porch sagged ever so slightly in the corner, but it was home. When her husband died, when the kids grew up and moved away, when friends faded like old photographs, Martha remained. And in that quiet, the world taught her a lesson she hadn't expected to learn so late in life. Silence, she discovered, was her greatest power. It wasn't always like that. In her younger years, Martha had been a talker, a fierce, opinionated, vibrant woman with a voice that could fill a room. She argued politics over dinner, corrected people in grocery lines, and felt it was her duty to speak up wherever she went. She believed that being heard was proof of being alive, being valuable, but that belief had chipped away over time, sometimes in small ways, sometimes all at once. She remembered one Sunday, years back, when her daughter had visited with her 3 children. Martha had launched into a story, one she'd told before, about a neighbor's dramatic divorce decades ago. Her granddaughter, barely a teenager, had looked up from her phone and sighed, "You've told us this one already, Grandma." The words had stung more than they should have, not because of what was said, but because Martha realized she had been repeating herself. She was speaking just to fill space. That moment sat with her, and as the visits became less frequent, the house quieter, the noise of her earlier years faded. For a while, she feared it meant she was becoming invisible. But slowly, she began to notice something else happening. In the silence, thoughts clarified. The noise of opinion and reaction dropped away. She didn't need to offer her thoughts on everything. She didn't need to prove her place. She began listening more. To others, yes, but mostly to herself. That's when she started walking every morning, just after sunrise. No phone, no music, just her steps on the gravel and the sound of birds greeting the day. She walked the same path through the woods behind her home, and with each passing week she heard more. The rustling leaves, the rhythm of distant deer, the soft whisper of her own breath. In that space, her mind untangled. Worries that once consumed her fell apart without the need for solving. She began to realize how much of her life had been spent reacting. When she was younger, every comment felt like a cue, every silence an obligation to speak. If someone expressed an opinion she didn't agree with, she had to respond. If a problem arose, she jumped to fix it. Her voice had been her sword and shield. But now she saw that silence wasn't surrender, it was strength. A boundary no one could cross, a space that no one could interrupt. People called less often. Sometimes she answered, sometimes she didn't. Not out of bitterness, but because she had learned that not every conversation was necessary. Some things didn't need to be said. Some invitations didn't need to be accepted. She began to protect her energy in a way she never had before. It wasn't loneliness, it was solitude, and it was rich. Inward, she began to focus. She kept a small notebook by her chair and filled it with thoughts she once would have spoken aloud. Reflections on aging, questions about God, memories of her children when they were small. Writing felt different than talking. It required attention, precision, and it didn't ask for applause. Some days, she sat and simply stared out the window, watching the trees. Not doing, not achieving, just being. And for the first time, she didn't feel guilty for it. The inward gaze wasn't always peaceful. In the silence, regrets resurfaced. Words she wished she hadn't said. Years she had rushed through trying to be everything to everyone. But she didn't push those feelings away. She welcomed them like old visitors, and in time, they softened. She forgave herself quietly, without fanfare. Neighbors came and went. One day, a young couple moved into the house next door. The woman was heavily pregnant, and Martha watched her from the kitchen window, waddling up the drive, arguing on the phone. Martha could tell she was overwhelmed. One evening, the woman knocked on her door to ask if she could borrow sugar. Martha handed her the bag and simply said, "It gets easier." The young woman looked relieved, and they stood in silence for a while before parting. Martha realized then that silence didn't mean having nothing to offer. It meant offering what mattered when it mattered, and letting the rest go. She didn't need to dominate space anymore. Her presence was enough. Her silence was not absence. It was presence, refined. She no longer sought validation, no longer needed to be the center of the story. She had lived her life, carried her share of burdens, made her share of mistakes, and now at 84, she had earned her peace. She understood that the world would go on without her opinions, that not every fire needed her breath. That quiet, when chosen, was a kind of mastery. Sometimes she would sit on her porch and watch the evening arrive, a cup of tea cooling in her hand. She could hear laughter from the house next door, a dog barking down the street, wind in the trees, but inside her, it was still. Not empty, full, not silent, serene. And in that silence, she was finally fully herself.